And aloha, folks. Welcome to this latest edition of Five Questions, which appears right here on the Rick Hamada program during the morning show. And also, you can find it on the homepage of HawaiiReporter.com. There is no doubt that a dominant topic in our community is and has been the rail project. We're delighted to chat with Randy Roth, UH professor, but also a party to a federal lawsuit regarding the rail project. And Randy, it's a pleasure to join you for Five Questions. How are you?
I'm just fine. Thank you, Rick.
Excellent. Thank you for joining us. Let's jump right on in, if you wouldn't mind, with question number one. And Randy, what motivated you to join the others who are suing the city over this rail project?
Well, I've felt for a long time that elevated heavy rail was a mistake for Oahu. But I think what really got me motivated enough to become a litigant in the lawsuit was the city's deception in selling elevated heavy rail to the public. The more closely I looked at it, the more obvious it was to me that they've used what could kindly be called strategic misrepresentation to make the public think that this was all about traffic congestion relief, which it really isn't at all, or that it was all about good jobs for the people of Hawaii, which it really isn't at all, or that it was all about saving energy or alternative fuels, or there's just a long list of things that the city has either expressly stated was a reason for rail or has implied that in every case has simply been wrong. I think the city has known that it was wrong from the very beginning, and it was that level of deception that motivated me to become a litigant.
Talking with Randy Roth and this edition of Five Questions. Randy, what's your assessment as we are today of winning in court, and what would happen to the project if, in fact, you are successful?
I'm guardedly optimistic that we're going to not just win in our federal lawsuit, but that we'll win on at least 3 or 4 of our 7 counts. And if we win on any one of those counts, rail, as the city has described it, is gone. Our lawyer in the case is the top lawyer in this area of law in the country. We've got a team of local pro bono lawyers and pro bono law students who are doing as much of the work as possible to keep down the cost of the litigation. But we knew that there would be high-powered legal representation on the city side, and so we brought in really, like I say, the top person in the nation, and he's really been quite I don't want to say confident, because you get into the courtroom and there's a human element. You never know for sure what's going to happen. But he has felt good about this from the very beginning, and the more I've studied it, the more I've learned about environmental law and the various other federal laws that are involved in this particular lawsuit, the more confident that I've become. And like I say, if we prevail on any one of our 7 allegations, then the city will not just have to stop the construction that they've started, they'll have to tear down everything that's there and then go through what's called an alternatives analysis, a real alternatives analysis, where they'll take a look at things that would actually reduce traffic congestion and accomplish the other things that the public has been led to believe that elevated heavy rail is all about.
Just a quick follow-up. Of those 7 particular counts, Randy, which one are you most confident in that the public should know about?
Well, some of the laws are a bit complicated, and one that we feel particularly good about is oftentimes referred to as our 4F claim. And that's the section of the federal law that we're referring to. And it has to do with the protection of certain kinds of properties. They're called protected properties, and parks, for example, would be a good example, historic structures, a number of things that are very much affected by the elevated heavy rail proposal. And that law basically says that if you've got alternatives to elevated heavy rail, which we know would adversely affect these various protected properties, if you've got alternatives that are prudent, alternatives that are reasonably effective, efficient, in other words, they would at least accomplish what elevated heavy rail would accomplish, then the law prohibits going forward with elevated heavy rail. And I've just summed up a very complex area of the law, but hopefully your listeners will we'll get a flavor for it. Another claim that we're making, and this one I think is more understandable, is that the law says before the city can decide which technology and which route, it has to do an objective and in-depth study of all the alternatives that could accomplish the goals of this major project. And it's called an alternatives analysis, and the city claims to have done that. We are convinced that they really didn't, that they went through the motions, that it really wasn't in-depth and objective, and we're reasonably confident that the court is going to agree with us in that assessment.
Talking with Randy Roth in 5 questions. The third question, Randy, is you've called the city's decision to start construction way ahead of any of the fundamentals in place the biggest wager in the state's history. Can you explain, please?
Well, I think they've started and they've committed themselves to spending hundreds of millions of dollars in addition to the money they'd have to spend if they have to tear it down. And they're in effect wagering that, number one, they will win the federal lawsuit. And as I just explained, I personally am quite confident that we're going to prevail on the federal lawsuit. So I think they're going to lose that wager. But even if we assume, for the sake of argument, that they win that wager, they also have to win another wager, and that is that Governor Cayetano is not elected mayor, because Governor Cayetano has made very clear that if he is our next mayor, he's going to stop rail, and there are any number of ways that he could do that. So the city is saying, we're going forward because we think we're going to win the lawsuit. We think somebody other than Governor Cayetano is going to win the mayoral campaign. And then on top of that, they think they're going to get $1.55 billion from the federal government. And I personally am convinced that they won't, because there's a lot of competition for that federal money. And as powerful as Senator Inouye is, there are a lot of communities around the country that want more of that money than what they would get if Hawaii gets $1.55 billion. So what they're saying in Washington, D.C. today is that it would make no sense to give $1.55 billion to a city that has already determined, if the person who's got a double-digit lead in the polls over all of his opponents combined, Governor Cayetano, that he's already said he would tear down whatever has been built. They also are taking a look at our federal lawsuit and recognize that we have an awfully good chance of prevailing there. So I think the city is not going to get the $1.55 billion from the federal government that they have to get in order for this wager to work. I think that Governor Cayetano is not going to be defeated, which he has to be in order for their wager to pay off. And I'm convinced that we're going to win our lawsuit, even though their wager is premised on the assumption that they will win the lawsuit, somebody other than Cayetano will be our next mayor, and they're going to get the $1.55 billion. I think under the circumstances, it's absolutely absurd that they are spending hundreds of millions of dollars of local taxpayer money that could have been spent on a number of other things that we truly need. They're doing all of that trying to build a system that they have acknowledged would not reduce traffic congestion at all.
Talking with Randy Roth, and question number 4 for Randy today is, there are folks who are listening, Randy, who do have that commute from central Oahu into town. They're putting up with heavy traffic congestion on their drive. What would you say to those folks today?
It's interesting you asked that question, because I actually had a telephone conversation yesterday with a fellow who lives out in the Kapolei area, and he described to me that he's been doing that commute for most of his life. He attended St. Louis School, he attended the University of Hawaii, and he's been commuting to his job in downtown Honolulu all of the time since then. So most of his life, he's been putting up with that rush hour commute. Some of it he's done on the bus, some of it he's done in his car, and he's really quite upset that the city has not done something before now to reduce that traffic congestion. And he called me because he heard me on your show actually a few weeks ago talking about the city's own experts saying that elevated heavy rail would not reduce the current level of traffic congestion. And he was asking what made me say that, or where could he find the statements that the experts had made. So I walked him through the HonoluluTraffic.com website and showed him where the environmental impact study is, and and we talked about what the FTA has said all about this. At the end of the conversation, he was really quite angry that the city, number one, has not done anything before now to relieve traffic congestion along that corridor. He was very, very angry that the city has been deceiving people into thinking that elevated heavy rail was all about reducing traffic congestion. And he wanted to know more about what the alternatives are. And, of course, there are a number of alternatives. And the longer we talked on the phone, the more determined this fellow was to try to get the city to stop wasting money on elevated heavy rail and start spending it on something that would actually solve the problem, which is terrible, intolerable traffic congestion on that corridor that we've been talking about.
We appreciate that, Randy. Thank you very much. Final question today of 5 questions. So after taking a look at everything that has been brought forward, what would you favor instead of rail to reduce traffic congestion, Randy?
Well, first of all, Rick, and I do have some thoughts on that, and I'll share them with you in a moment, but the tragedy of this thing is that if the city had simply done an alternatives analysis that is required by federal law, then we would have a lot more information. We would have data accumulated by the experts. We would have all sorts of information that you and I and everybody else could look to in figuring out what we think would be the best alternative. The fact that we don't have that, number one, is one reason why the city is going to lose the federal lawsuit. But number two, I think it's tragic in the sense that there isn't as much information for the public as what the public is entitled to. I've spent a lot of time, way more time than a regular person with a job and a family and all sorts of things that compete for our time. I've had an opportunity as a litigant to spend a great deal of time looking into all of this, and there clearly are solutions to traffic congestion. If that's the problem, and I think it is, the city obviously has something else in mind with elevated heavy rail, but if that's the problem, the easy start is to build on our award-winning bus service. We've got a terrific bus service, and they could expand the express buses that are used by commuters coming in along that corridor that we've been talking about. They could get rid of bottlenecks on the highways. There are certain places on H1 where you just know every single day it's a bottleneck. It's going to slow things down almost to a standstill there, and you're going to have that backed up for many, many miles. Yes, it's expensive to eliminate those bottlenecks, but nothing compared to the cost of elevated heavy rail. The zipper lanes, which have been working amazingly well, and it's the reason why buses, even in rush hour now, at their slowest, get to downtown from the Kapolei area faster than what the train would be if the train were built and the train were running perfectly as it's been planned. In other words, with that zipper lane coming in, people who get out of their cars and ride their buses actually have a very, very nice alternative to being stuck in that traffic congestion because of those zipper lanes, and their plans to expand the zipper lanes and use them in the afternoon rush hour traffic. So there are things like that, Rick, and managed lanes, for example, that if you don't want to take a lane that would otherwise be available to any vehicle and use it as the so-called zipper lane for an amount of money much, much less than what elevated heavy rail would cost, we could actually build some separate lanes. It'd be one way coming in the morning, one way going out in the afternoon that, like the zipper lanes, would accommodate those vehicles like buses that have a lot of people in them. And the idea isn't to get more cars into town in the morning and more cars out in the afternoon. It's to get the cars in faster so that people aren't spending so much time sitting in their cars, stuck in traffic, instead of working and enjoying their family and doing all sorts of things that can benefit the people of this island and can benefit the economy of this island and can just make this the kind of place that we want to give to the next generation.
Randy, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to join us for this edition of 5 Questions. We appreciate you greatly, and I certainly hope that we can do this again sometime in the future.
Thank you, Rick. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you so much, Randy. Take care. Bye now.
Bye.